The stars had always been kind to the. For 10,000 years, their world had known peace. Their cities rose from the warm oceans like dreams made of crystal and light. Their people swam through clean waters and walked on shores where no weapon had ever been raised in anger. They were healers, teachers, and friends to 100 different species across the galaxy. But on this night, the stars brought death. Ambassador stood at the great window of the High Council chamber and watched the enemy ships fill the sky. There were so many of them. 300 warships of the Dominion hung in orbit like a swarm of metal insects, blocking out the light of the twin moons. Their dark hulls were covered in weapons, and their engines glowed with the angry red of conquest. The old ambassador pressed his webbed hand against the cold glass. His silver scales had grown dull with age, and his 3 hearts beat slower than they once did. He had lived for over 200 cycles, and in all that time, he had never known fear like this. "The shield generators are failing," said Commander, walking up to stand beside him. The young military officer's scales shifted colors with stress, moving from calm blue to worried yellow. "We have perhaps 6 rotations before they break through completely. After that, the bombardment will begin." Closed his large, dark eyes. 12 billion lived on this world, mothers and fathers, children who had never known anything but peace, scientists working to cure diseases, artists creating beauty. All of them would die when those ships opened fire. "Have we received any response to our distress calls?" the ambassador asked, though he already knew the answer. Made a sound of frustration. "They say they cannot spare any ships. They claim their own borders are threatened. The fear that helping us will make them targets. They have suggested that we negotiate surrender terms with the." "Surrender," repeated, and the word tasted like poison. He knew what surrender meant: slavery. Their children taken to work in mines on distant worlds. Their knowledge stolen. Their culture erased. Death would be kinder. "We have helped them all," said bitterly. "When the plague struck, our doctors traveled for 3 cycles to save their people. When the Civil War ended, our diplomats helped them rebuild. We have given everything to the Galactic Conquered, and now they abandon us." The ambassador turned away from the window. The council chamber was empty now. The other members had gone to be with their families, to spend what might be their final days holding the ones they loved. Had no family left. His wife had returned to the great ocean long ago, and his children lived on colony worlds that were too far away to help. "There must be someone," he said, "someone who will answer." Was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was uncertain. "There is one species we have not contacted, the humans of Earth." Turned to look at him. "The humans, they only joined the Conquered 40 cycles ago. They are newcomers. Their technology is primitive compared to ours. Their ships are slow, their weapons are crude, and they have no experience with galactic warfare." "I know," admitted, "but they are the only ones we have not asked." The ambassador thought about the humans. He had met a few of them at diplomatic gatherings over the years. They were strange creatures, soft-skinned and fragile-looking with only 2 eyes and 1 heart. They breathed only air and could not survive in water. They were short, barely a single cycle by standards. And yet there was something about them that made other species uncomfortable. A hardness in their eyes, a tension in their bodies like predators waiting to strike. "What could they possibly do against 300 warships?" asked. "Nothing," said honestly. "They have perhaps 40 combat vessels in their entire fleet. Even if they came, even if they were willing to fight, they would be destroyed." "Then why suggest it?" The young commander's scales shifted to a deep purple, the color of desperate hope. "Because I would rather die knowing that someone tried to help us. Because I want my children to know that when the end came, at least one species in this galaxy cared enough to answer our call." Looked at him for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "Send the message," he said. "Tell them everything. Tell them about our shields, about how much time we have left, and tell them," he paused, searching for the right words, Tell them that we do not expect them to save us. We only ask that they remember us. That when they are gone, someone will know that we existed and that we asked for help even though none came. Bowed his head and left to prepare the transmission. Turned back to the window. The enemy ships had begun to move, slowly tightening their circle around the planet like a fist preparing to crush something fragile. Somewhere down in the city below, he could hear singing. They always sang when they were afraid. It was how they had faced storms and disasters for thousands of years. Tonight the songs were sad. The ambassador did not expect the humans to come. He did not expect anyone to come. The galaxy had made its choice, and they would face their end alone. But as he listened to his people sing in the darkness, he allowed himself one small moment of foolish hope. Perhaps, somewhere out there among the cold and distant stars, someone would hear their cry. Perhaps someone would care. He pressed his hand against the glass one more time, feeling the vibration of the planetary shields as they struggled against the constant assault. 6 days, that was all the time they had left. 6 days until the end of everything. And so the message went out across the void, traveling faster than light, carrying the last hope of a dying world toward a small blue planet called Earth. The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, but Lieutenant Commander Daniel Carter did not notice. He sat at his monitoring station in the depths of the United Nations Space Command headquarters in Geneva, watching screens filled with routine traffic data. It was the night shift, the quiet hours when nothing ever happened. Then his console began to flash red. Daniel sat up straight, almost knocking over his coffee cup. A priority transmission was coming through on the emergency frequency, a channel that had never been used in the 3 years he had worked this job. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, pulling up the message and running it through the translation software. What he read made his blood turn cold. The under attack, 300 enemy warships, 12 billion lives, 6 days until destruction. Every other species had refused to help. This was their last hope. Daniel grabbed his communicator and called his supervisor. Then he called his supervisor's supervisor. Within the hour, the message had reached the highest levels of Earth's military command. Admiral Vance was not a woman who showed surprise easily. She had spent 30 years in the military, rising through the ranks through a combination of brilliant tactical thinking and absolute determination. She had commanded ships in 3 different conflicts, negotiated with alien species who found humans distasteful, and built Earth's combined fleet from a handful of vessels into a respectable fighting force. But when she read the message, even she felt her heart skip a beat. She called an emergency meeting in the war room, a large chamber deep underground where the most important decisions were made. The holographic display in the center showed a map of the galaxy, with Velar Prime marked in pulsing red. Around the table sat her most trusted officers. Captain Mitchell was the commander of the carrier Tempest, the largest ship in Earth's fleet. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and calm eyes that had seen too much combat. Commander Lisa Monroe led the destroyer squadron, a group of fast attack ships that could strike hard and disappear before the enemy knew what hit them. She was younger than Mitchell, with short dark hair and a reputation for bold action. Chief Tactical Officer Gray rounded out the group. He rarely spoke, but when he did, people listened. "I assume you have all read the message," Admiral Vance said. Her voice was steady, but those who knew her could see the tension in her jaw. "They helped us during the Martian plague outbreak," Captain Mitchell said thoughtfully. "They sent medical ships and scientists when no one else would. They saved over 2 million lives and refused any payment." "That was before we joined the Conquered," Commander Monroe added. "They did it simply because we asked." Admiral Vance nodded. "Now they are asking us for help. The question is simple. Do we answer?" The room was silent for a moment. Then Gray spoke, his voice quiet but clear. 300 warships against our fleet of 42. The numbers are not in our favor." "No, they are not," the Admiral agreed. If we go, we will be nearly 7-1. We will lose ships. We will lose people. There is a very real chance that we will fail completely and every single one of us will die. She looked around the table, meeting each officer's eyes in turn. But they are a peaceful species. They have no real military. They have spent their entire history healing and helping others. They have done nothing to deserve what is about to happen to them. And every other species in the galaxy has decided that they are not worth saving. Captain Mitchell leaned forward. "What are you proposing, Admiral?" "I am proposing that we show the galaxy what kind of species we are," Vance said. "I am proposing that we answer the call not because it is easy, not because we will win, but because it is right. Because when someone asks for help and everyone else turns away, humans do not turn away." Commander Monroe smiled, a fierce expression that showed her teeth. The conquered species fight in neat formations and follow predictable patterns. They have never faced human tactics. They think we are primitive because our ships are simple. They do not understand that our ships are simple because we do not need complexity to destroy our enemies. "We have spent 10,000 years fighting each other," Gray added, and there was something dark in his voice. "We have perfected the art of war in ways that the conquered cannot imagine. Every battle they have ever fought has been a polite exchange between civilized peoples. They have never faced a species that was forged in blood." Admiral Vance stood up and walked to the holographic display. She looked at the red dot marking Velar Prime, so far away across the endless dark. "I will not order anyone to come with me," she said. "This is a volunteer mission. Anyone who stays behind will face no judgment. But I am going. I am taking the Tempest and anyone who wants to join me, and I am going to answer that call." She turned to face her officers. "Who is with me?" Captain Mitchell stood first, then Commander Monroe, then Gray. One by one, every officer in the room rose to their feet. Admiral Vance felt something warm in her chest, pride perhaps, or hope. "Then let us show these aliens what humanity is made of," she said. "All ships prepare for emergency jump. We leave in 12 hours." The orders went out across the fleet. Crews were recalled from leave. Weapons were loaded. Engines were powered up. 42 ships began to move, gathering together in orbit around Earth like a pack of wolves preparing for the hunt. And on that small blue planet below, billions of people watched the news and learned that their military was going to war for strangers they had never met, against odds that seemed impossible, simply because someone had asked for help. It was a very human thing to do. Commander had stopped sleeping. There was no point anymore. The shields were failing faster than expected, and the Dominion had grown tired of waiting. Their supreme commander, a massive creature called Overlord, had transmitted his final message just hours ago. "You have one rotation to surrender," the Overlord had said, his face filling every screen on the planet. He was covered in thick gray armor and his 4 eyes burned with cruel pleasure. "After that, we begin the bombardment. Your cities will burn, your oceans will boil, and every living thing on your world will die. Choose wisely." Ambassador had not responded. There was nothing left to say. Now stood on the observation deck of the Planetary Defense Station, watching the enemy fleet move into bombardment position. 300 ships arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around the planet, their weapons pointed downward like fingers of death. In a few hours, they would open fire, and everything they had built would be reduced to ash. "Sir," said a young sensor officer, her voice trembling, "I am detecting something strange. New signatures emerging from hyperspace." Turned sharply, "More reinforcements." "No, sir, the energy patterns are different, they match." She checked her readings twice, unable to believe what she was seeing. "They match human ships." The commander rushed to the sensor station. On the screen, 42 new contacts appeared, scattered across the system in random positions. Compared to the massive warships, they looked tiny, fragile, insignificant. But they were here. They came, whispered. They actually came. On the bridge of the flagship, Overlord received the same sensor readings. He looked at them for a long moment, then made a sound that was almost like laughter. "Humans," he said, his voice filled with contempt. "The newcomers, the primitives, they send 40 ships against 300. He turned to his tactical officer. "Destroy them. Do not waste time. Simply eliminate them and continue with the bombardment." The fleet began to turn, redirecting weapons toward the human ships. They moved with the precision of a well-trained military, following patterns that had won them 100 victories across the galaxy. But something was wrong. The human ships were not behaving like normal vessels. They were not forming defensive lines or retreating to safety. Instead, they were accelerating directly toward the fleet at speeds that made the tactical officers gasp. Their engines burned so bright that they looked like stars, pushing the ships faster than any conquered vessel should be able to move. And then the speakers on every ship came alive, with a sound none of them had ever heard. It was music, loud, aggressive, pounding music filled with drums and strange instruments that screamed with electric fury. The humans were broadcasting it on all frequencies, filling the void of space with sound. "What is that noise?" demanded. "What are they doing?" No one could answer. The carrier Tempest reached the edge of weapons range and began to launch fighters. Small craft poured from its hangar bays like angry insects, hundreds of them in less than 3 minutes. The speed of the launch was impossible by conquered standards. No species could prepare and deploy that many fighters that quickly. But humans were not like other species. The fighters did not attack in formation. They broke apart into individual units, each one moving independently, each one choosing its own targets. They wove between the capital ships with movements so fast and unpredictable that the targeting computers could not track them. "They are too fast," the tactical officer reported, his voice rising with panic. "Our weapons cannot lock onto them. They are moving at acceleration levels that would kill our pilots." Stared at the display. The human pilots were pulling turns and dives that should have crushed them under their own body weight. No species in the conquered could survive such forces. The humans were either using some technology he did not understand, or they were simply tougher than he had imagined. The first battleship lost its shields. The human fighters had targeted the exact location of the shield generators, hitting them with precise strikes that should have required detailed knowledge of ship designs. How did they know? How could they possibly know? 17 missiles hit the exposed battleship. The reactor exploded, and the massive vessel broke apart in a ball of fire. "Return fire," screamed. "All ships return fire." But the human destroyers had reached the fleet now, and they were not fighting like any enemy they had ever faced. Instead of staying at safe distance and exchanging fire, they dove directly into the formation. They used the enemy ships as cover, positioning themselves so that any vessel that tried to shoot them would risk hitting their own allies. It was madness, it was chaos, and it was working. On the observation deck of the defense station, Commander watched the battle unfold with wide eyes. His scales had shifted to pure white, the color of absolute shock. "They are insane," he said softly. "They are completely insane." Ambassador stood beside him, watching the tiny human ships tear through the fleet like predators among prey. The peaceful old diplomat had never seen violence like this. He had never imagined that any species could fight with such ferocity. "Not insane," he said slowly, beginning to understand. "They are simply fighting the way humans fight. We thought they were primitive because their technology was simple. We never considered that they made it simple on purpose, because their real weapons are not their ships or their guns." He pointed at the display, at the human fighters dancing through enemy fire. "Their weapon is themselves, their minds, their bodies, their will. 10,000 years of war against each other has made them into something the galaxy has never seen before." Another ship exploded, then another. The humans were not just winning, they were dominating, and for the first time in their history of conquest, were starting to feel something they had never felt before. Fear. Admiral Vance stood at the center of the Tempest's bridge, calm and focused while chaos exploded all around her. The holographic display showed the battle in perfect detail, enemy ships marked in red, her own forces in blue. The blue dots were everywhere, moving through the red formation like wolves tearing through a herd. "Destroyer Squadron status report," she said, her voice steady and clear. Commander Lisa Monroe's response came through immediately. "We have broken through their center line. Their cruisers are turning to pursue, exactly as you predicted. They have no idea what they are walking into." Admiral Vance allowed herself a small smile. They were experienced conquerors, but they had never fought an enemy like humanity. They followed patterns, formations, rules of engagement that made sense in the polite wars of the Galactic conquered. They had never faced an enemy that made up new rules as they went along. "Captain Mitchell, bring the carrier group around their left flank. Coordinate the fighter wings for a concentrated strike on their command ships." "Understood, Admiral," Gray replied. His fingers danced across his console, sending orders to hundreds of pilots scattered across the battlefield. Each one received targeting data, timing instructions, and attack vectors calculated to cause maximum destruction. They were starting to adapt. They pulled their ships into formations, trying to protect each other with overlapping fields of fire. It was a reasonable response, exactly what the tactical manuals of 100 civilized species would recommend. Admiral Vance had been counting on it. "Monroe, execute attack pattern Omega, all destroyers now." The destroyer squadron had been playing a game of chase, letting the cruisers follow them away from the main fleet. Now they suddenly stopped running. All 15 destroyers spun around in perfect coordination and unleashed everything they had. Missiles, plasma cannons, rounds, and nuclear-tipped torpedoes ripped into the pursuing cruisers before they could react. 23 cruisers died in less than a minute. "Their formation is collapsing," reported. "Enemy commander is trying to pull back and reorganize." "Do not let him," Vance said. "Press the attack. Keep them confused, keep them scared, keep them dying." In the cockpit of her fighter, pilot Amy Richards was having the time of her life. She had destroyed 9 enemy vessels so far, weaving through the battle with skill that came from years of training and a natural gift for violence. Her fighter was small and fast, designed to exploit the weaknesses that human engineers had found in ship designs. The aliens built their ships for intimidation, with weapons pointing in every direction. They never expected an enemy to get close. They never imagined that anyone would be crazy enough to fly directly at them. Amy was crazy enough. She spotted a command ship, larger than the others, covered in communication arrays and sensor equipment. Officers on that ship were probably trying to coordinate the fleet's defense. If she could take it out, the confusion would spread. She pushed her engines to maximum, feeling the G-forces press her deep into her seat. Her vision narrowed as blood struggled to reach her brain. Any other species would have blacked out, but humans had trained for this. They had built their bodies and their machines to work together in ways that seemed impossible. The command ship's point defense weapons tried to track her. She rolled and dove, changing direction so fast that the targeting computers could not keep up. 3 other fighters from her wing joined her, and together they strafed the command ship's shield generators. The shields fell. Amy armed her remaining missiles and fired everything she had into the exposed hull. The command ship exploded. But the debris caught her fighter, shredding one of her engines and sending her spinning out of control. Warning lights flashed across her cockpit. She was going to crash. There was no way to stop it. So she aimed. Another vessel, a heavy cruiser, was directly in her path. Amy Richards, with only seconds left, locked her remaining weapons onto the cruiser's bridge and fired. Then she ejected, her seat rocketing away from the dying fighter just before it slammed into the cruiser's command section. Both ships were destroyed. Amy floated in space, her suit keeping her alive, watching the battle continue around her. Her radio crackled. "Richards, this is Rescue Team Delta. We have your position. Hold tight, we are coming." "Take your time," she said, grinning inside her helmet. "The view is pretty good from here." On the flagship, Overlord was screaming orders that no one could follow. His fleet was falling apart. Ships were exploding everywhere. His captains were panicking, breaking formation, running away. This was not supposed to happen. Humans were supposed to be weak, primitive, easy to destroy. "How?" he demanded, slamming his armored fist into his command console. "How are they doing this?" His tactical officer was dead, killed when a human missile had breached the bridge's outer hull. The replacement was young and terrified. "They are not fighting like any enemy in our records," the young officer stammered. "They take risks that should be suicidal. They sacrifice themselves without hesitation. They adapt faster than our computers can predict." Looked at the battle display. More than half his fleet was gone. The humans had lost 9 ships and they were still coming, still attacking, still killing. For the first time in his long career of conquest, the Overlord understood that he had made a terrible mistake. He had come to this system expecting to destroy a peaceful species and take their world. Instead, he had awakened something dangerous, something that had been sleeping in the darkness of the galaxy, waiting to be challenged. He had awakened Earth. "All ships retreat," he ordered, his voice hollow. "Full withdrawal to hyperspace, now." The surviving vessels began to flee. Some made it to hyperspace. Many did not. The human ships chased them without mercy, destroying everything they could catch. Admiral Vance watched the enemy fleet scatter and run. She felt no joy, only tired satisfaction. "Stand down from attack posture," she said. "Search and rescue teams begin operations. I want every survivor found, ours and theirs." The battle was over. The humans had won. The battle had lasted 11 hours. When dawn came to Velar Prime, the sky was clear. The enemy ships were gone, either destroyed or fled into the darkness of deep space. The only vessels remaining in orbit were the battered but victorious ships of Earth's fleet. 187 warships had been destroyed. 94 had surrendered. The rest had escaped into hyperspace, carrying with them stories that would spread fear throughout the Dominion for generations. The humans had lost 9 ships and 2,418 souls. Every one of them had known the risks. Every one of them had chosen to come anyway. Admiral Vance rode a shuttle down to the surface of Velar Prime, accompanied by Captain Mitchell and Commander Lisa Monroe. They wore their dress uniforms, cleaned and pressed despite the exhaustion that weighed on all of them. They had not slept in over 30 hours, but there would be time for rest later. The shuttle landed in the great plaza at the center of the capital city. As the doors opened, the Admiral heard a sound that made her breath catch in her throat. Singing. Millions of had gathered in the streets. They filled every road, every bridge, every platform that rose from the crystal towers. Their voices joined together in a song that was older than human civilization, a song of thanks that had not been sung in 10,000 years. The humans walked through the crowd, and everywhere they went, they reached out to touch them. Webbed hands brushed against their uniforms, their arms, their faces. The aliens wept openly, their scales shifting through colors that humans could not name, colors that meant gratitude beyond words. Children swam through the crowds to see the strange creatures who had saved them. Old ones who remembered the ancient legends looked at the humans with something like religious wonder. Warriors who had been ready to die defending their families bowed their heads in respect. At the steps of the High Council chamber, Ambassador waited. His scales had regained some of their old silver shine, and his ancient eyes were wet with tears. Behind him stood Commander and the other leaders of the people. Admiral Vance climbed the steps and stopped before the ambassador. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The singing faded to silence as everyone waited. "You came," finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "We asked and you came. No one else would help us. The entire galaxy turned its back on us, but you came." "Yes," Vance said simply, "we came." Why? The question carried the weight of 12 billion lives saved, of a civilization that would continue because strangers from a distant world had chosen to fight for them. You owed us nothing. You risked everything, your ships, your people, your own existence for us, for strangers. Why? Admiral Vance thought about her answer carefully. She thought about the 2,000 soldiers who would never go home, the 9 ships that were now debris floating in the void. She thought about the fear she had felt when she gave the order to jump, knowing that she might be leading her people to their deaths. And she thought about the message that had crossed the stars, carrying the desperate hope of a dying world. "Because you asked for help," she said at last. "That is all the reason we have ever needed." Stared at her. In all his years of studying other species, negotiating treaties, building bridges between alien cultures, he had never encountered anything like this. The humans were not motivated by profit or politics or fear. They simply believed in some deep and fundamental way that when someone needed help, you helped them. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, it was utterly human. Slowly, the ancient ambassador extended his webbed hand toward her. It was a human gesture, one he had studied but never used. Admiral Vance took it, her small, warm fingers wrapping around his cool, scaled ones. The crowd erupted in cheers that shook the crystal towers. In the days that followed, recordings of the battle spread across the galaxy. Every species in the conquered watched the footage of human fighters dancing through enemy fire, of destroyers diving into the heart of an armada, of a species that should have been destroyed instead achieving impossible victory. The reactions varied. The who had refused to help sent apologetic messages that the humans politely ignored. The offered alliance treaties that suddenly seemed much more attractive. The who had suggested surrender quietly voted to increase their own military spending. The Dominion entered a period of chaos. Overlord was executed for his failure, and the survivors of his fleet told stories of human warriors that grew more frightening with each telling. For the first time in their history of conquest, they began to consider which worlds were too dangerous to attack. Earth was at the top of that list. But it was an interview with Captain Mitchell that truly captured the attention of the galaxy. He was still recovering from injuries he had received when the Tempest took damage during the battle, sitting in a hospital bed with bandages on his arms and face. A reporter asked him the same question everyone was asking. Why had the humans come? Why had they risked so much for people they did not know? Mitchell smiled, a tired but genuine expression that showed no regret. "Where we come from," he said, "you do not turn your back on people who need you. It does not matter if they are human or alien, friends or strangers. It does not matter if the odds are against you or if you might fail. When someone calls for help, you answer. That is just who we are." He looked directly at the camera, and billions of beings across 1,000 worlds felt the weight of his gaze. That is what it means to be human. Ambassador watched the interview from his chambers, listening to the translation with something close to awe. He had spent his long life trying to understand the countless species of the galaxy, and he thought he had seen everything. He had been wrong. The humans were something new, something the galaxy had never encountered before. They were capable of terrible violence, yes, but also of profound compassion. They could destroy entire fleets, but they could also cross the stars to save strangers. They were dangerous and gentle, fierce and kind, all at once. For the first time in 10,000 years, they did not feel alone in the universe. They had found more than allies. they had found friends. And across the galaxy, other species began to learn a lesson they would never forget. When the darkness comes and hope seems lost, when the strong prey upon the weak and no one else will stand, look to the stars. Because somewhere out there, watching and waiting, are the warriors of Earth. And when you need them most, they will descend in storms.